Good morning, folks. This is Talking Point here on WSN, your content capital, the only station in the nation broadcasting in HD. And we are WESN. We strive to produce local content here. Sean Michael Small. With all my co-hosts, once again, I know Janelle John Bates today. Hopefully, we will be welcoming another colleague to speak on some of the recent observations that I've been having for the last 2 days. It's not wanting to be a downer because the subject had me down this week. However, we still do have to talk about it. So we'll get into a conversation with our very own Sule Joseph later on the show. But until then, we are ready today for my co-host Keita Shah to join us. #Free Keita Shah. But the show must go on. We have a lot to get into with regards to crime, not necessarily some crime stories, but also some commentary or some information with regards to our criminal justice system. So, for more on that, let's start off this morning's Daily Review. And the first story that I wanted to talk about this morning, one that I'll probably connect other things back to, it caught my attention because I thought, well, this is some good news, but... And that is the fact that fraud squad officers have arrested and charged 4 people with regards to 2 situations, generally speaking, of corruption. One in the HDC, one in licensing office. Now, the HDC situation is a bit more straightforward. It seems as though a plumber employed by the HDC was falsifying invoices, submitting fraudulent invoices for payment for work rendered to senior citizens on behalf of the Ministry of Social Development and Family Services within the years of 2016 to 2019. So that's a bit more straightforward. The other situation involves 3 men in licensing office where apparently the owner of a vehicle found out that his vehicle was registered or transferred the title of the vehicle without his consent or even knowledge. He only found this out when he visited licensing office to verify or confirm the information about his vehicle. I myself, I'm not entirely sure. It doesn't say exactly who was in possession of the vehicle at the time, etc., etc. What was the nature of his inquiry? Did something happen that forced him to go into a licensing office, or did they just change the paperwork for whatever reason but didn't necessarily finish off whatever scheme it was? But 3 people who work for licensing, they more or less were arrested in an operation. A temporary clerk, as well as a motor vehicle inspector, and an information computer technician. The last 2 are 49 and 51 years old. Potentially, it implies that they might have been doing this for a long time. The temporary clerk, well, unless he's on temporary contract to temporary contract, he might be new to this scheme. If it's a scheme, maybe it was a favor, not necessarily a well thought out favor. But it's good news. It's good news in the sense that, look, some aspects of the system works, right? Because there's always a chance that when there's corruption, people don't necessarily want to help out the victim, in part because it's an uphill battle depending on how widespread the corruption is and who wants to buck the unofficial system, who wants to be the fish that tries to swim against the current, because then you might drown. Although in this case, the situation might not be as dangerous as some other cases could be with regards to corruption in public office or in the public sector. But then there's also the fact that, you don't know who's involved, so when you speak to them, they might be trying to cover it up. And even if someone is trying to cover it up, they might not be doing it out of guilt or association with the crime, but rather they don't want the organization to be besmirched. Usually you see this consideration at times with regards to politicians. They don't want the bad name, especially if the politicians could be somewhat closely tied to the situation, whether they knew about it or not, whether they authorized it or not. Because at the end of the day, accountability is a tricky thing, right? The buck has to stop at the top, and people have gotten in trouble for things their subordinates have done because they were not monitoring the work close enough. Or you just don't necessarily want the situation to look as though it's gotten out of hand, because then questions will come about, and those questions could lead to other things, larger questions. So it's good to know that the system will work a little bit. The problem I may have is, let's be real. And this might be a blatant attempt, which is why I think it's a bad idea. We're not talking about somebody passing a little bit of money under the table for a favor that could go undetected for the most part. We're talking about someone trying to essentially transfer ownership. The owner is still alive and kicking. He could still make inquiries. It seems like the solution was pretty straightforward. But what about the situations where the solution is not so straightforward? Because to some extent, things like this, fraudulent invoices and corruption in any sort of regulatory body, the basic assumption in any society is that it's not going to be zero, right? Let's just start from there. And we have two examples of two different types of corruption. Well, we know it's not going to be one. We know that it's not just going to be one isolated incident and everybody is on the side of angels. Because at the end of the day, there is no nation in the world outside of those with extreme draconian laws, and even then, corruption within the system is never assumed to be zero. And you don't lowball it with a figure like one. So what about all the other cases? Where's the statistics on that? So we got a couple people for corruption, but it seems as though it's kind of small time. Well, I don't know how much the money the plumber was charging. But what about the rest? And I believe this is one of the situations where the transport commissioner is appealing to the public to report instances of corruption in public institutions, not just his own, and cooperate with law enforcement authorities in bringing perpetrators to justice. That is an important message. It seems obvious. It's not necessarily one that we take heed to. And that'll lead me to the next couple of stories. So the second story I want to get into, there was a press conference that the TTPS held, and Senior Superintendent of Homicide, Rishi Singh, said unavailability of evidence is the major reason for the current 13% solve rate for murders. They don't have evidence. They might have intelligence similar to gang activity, but they don't have evidence. So they can't charge anybody in a murder case, right? And always remember, when they say solve rate, they don't mean we solved the murder. It's 100% solved. When they take it to trial, 100% conviction rate, no chance. That's not how the process works. But for the purposes of police classification and statistics, solve just means that they have more or less done their part in the investigation. They have found a suspect, they've found enough evidence to charge, and they've given all of that over to the DPP, and they were told to arrest and charge the man, and then he goes to trial. And then it's more or less out of their hands. So for the police, it's solved until or unless the person is acquitted. If the person, of course, is found guilty, well, it's obvious how the system will deal with it. And, errors in conviction notwithstanding. But I found it interesting that he said that. And I do have to wonder, what is the issue? And why is it that it seems as though we always hear, and this goes back to the budget, about how crime fighting with forensics, this and a lab, that, and, you know, gun analysis, firearms analysis, gunpowder residue, fingerprints, all right. But why is it that we don't seem to be able to have these physical evidence collection capabilities in any meaningful way? Because it's a 13%. That's what he's saying for this year, or just in general, 13%. Because there have been 454 reported murders for the first 9 months of the year, 60 of which have been solved. And apparently, this is actually more than where we were last year. Although on average, we are on pace, if it goes by the average number of murders per month, we're on pace for the 604, basically. And this comes back to what the Transport Commissioner said. Now, he was asking for people to speak out with regards to corruption. I'm saying, well, to some extent, you might not want to be a snitch, but then for some reason we seem to be fine remaining as victims. And I know that's an unfortunate thing to say, because it was reported, it should be in today's news, or it was reported yesterday, an online article in one of the daily newspapers, that the father of the murdered 13-year-old Andrea Lalonde was shot, is still fighting for his life. And the reason why I bring that story up is they reported it and they were attacked. And it might be easy for people to think, well, I'm not going to say anything. But the problem is, all right, but in her case, she was already a victim. And to some extent, you don't know if you allow a criminal situation to continue to fester, at what point will you now become a victim? Let's go to the third story. A daily newspaper has an article with transcripts from what it says are recordings of a gang leader communicating with a contractor or the contractor's representative in order to extort money or get jobs for his gang members. Fortunately, the contractor was able to record the call, and it seems as though the alleged gang leader even asked him if he recorded. In one instance, it was a phone call. In another instance, it was actually an in-person meeting. And the contractor admitted it. And the gang leader didn't do anything about it. Very brazen. But this story comes on the heels of a previous story last month where someone got an HCC contract, Mr. Barker, $90,000, and he refused to pay the demanded 20% extortion tax for protection, to prevent bad things from happening. And then he was murdered. Now, didn't seem that he reported it, he still became a victim. So as much as you might think, oh, I don't want to be involved, they might come after me. It's true, they might come after you. But here's a guy who potentially was not involved. And they came after him anyway. And the article, of course, is of a construction contractor. They're coming after him as well. Extortion can happen in any business. It doesn't just have to happen in the construction sector. And I don't know to what extent, how widespread it is. Is it on local businesses, small businesses, retail outlets, big businesses? I don't know how far it will reach. And the sad part is, do we want to wait for the government's plans to come to fruition and we just do nothing and hope for the best? Do we do something drastic in the next election and hope the next group will somehow figure it out. But when we have a 13% murder rate, I don't know, I would hope that if somebody close to me was killed, someone would speak out so we could find the killers if I don't have any information myself. It does not help that there's a lot of rumors and speculations about a lot of things, right? Within politics, within crime, within corruption, everybody knows the rumors, and I say everybody knows with sarcasm. The rumors with regards to the former Commissioner Griffith and what was going on with the firearm users license situation. And of course, that makes it easy now in everybody's minds to tie him to that situation and that investigation, despite the fact that nothing has yet been proven. We might know. And these sorts of rumors, the police also in their press conference, they have spoken out against the fact that it's not always helpful because it's not always true. And social media has a tendency to spread these things. Sometimes they could besmirch someone's reputation for no good reason, but other times they could bring up false information on cases or reveal pertinent information on cases that doesn't help the investigation, potentially harms it. So, part of the thing, because I'm pretty sure we've all run into situations, if not a murder situation or a violent robbery, we've run into corruption. Why don't we report it? Is it that we don't trust the system? Because to some extent, a lot of people generally know that there's a lot of corruption and bubble going on in public offices. And like the TTPS and all of the bad things that's associated with the TTPS, all of the news of the bad instances of the bad apples, I'm sure people have a very bad impression of the public service on a whole. You might get good interactions here or there, but it erodes the confidence in the system to begin with. So it's a hell of a tall order of what I'm saying. I understand, it's daunting. But the fact of the matter is, we have to start from somewhere. And people have to be willing to stand up. And I'll say it again, standing your ground to defend your household, that's one way to fight a crime situation. But what happens when you're not at home? That's all standing your ground will turn into, you know. Not every wife, mother, grandmother might be willing to pull out the handgun and successfully deter the bandits. They might shoot blindly and piss off the bandits and cause the bandits to shoot back at her and kill her. The general assumption is stand your ground. The man of the house will defend the house. What happens when the man of the house is at work? What happens when the man of the house goes to the supermarket to get something for dinner in the late afternoon? The criminals will just figure that out and work around it accordingly. You want to fight against crime? Don't just be on the defensive back foot trying to safeguard your little house, waiting for the next criminal to come across. We have to be more willing to give the police more evidence, more assistance if we want these things to become a thing of the past, this level of murder. All right. Last two stories, very quick mention. First of all, Minister of Energy, he's announced new rounds of shallow water bidding with regards to exploration and, if found, exploitation of any oil or natural gas there within. But I'll be honest, we had a deep water round, we had an onshore round, now it's a shallow water round. He sounds very optimistic, but we've seen this before. I think this is just telling that we're in need in the short term of good news. Well, in this case, this might be more long-term planning, which means that diversification, because Dragon and Manatee is a long-term endeavor. We ain't seeing anything for years out of those endeavors, out of those projects. And now if someone is going to do exploration, how long will it take, if anything is found, for that to become online? More than 4 years, I think. So where's the diversification? Why is it that we're still all in on energy? If we squeeze the last drop of oil out of the country and we're not prepared for what comes after because we're only expending capital and squeezing every last drop out, what are we going to do when the barrels are empty? We'll see. And last thing, the Meteorological Service, they have basically said that the rain showers yesterday and what they expect for another 24 hours, it's going to be temporary relief. There's still a heat warning at the end of the month. This is not like last week or the week before where it more or less ended the yellow level heat warning for the rest of September. However, I do wonder if to some extent the way how the downdraft, the freak winds, and the heavy rain happened last week, if that situation might be replicated because of the heat and what it does to the air and the environment, if those things could be replicated, and we might see more situations of heavy rain. This is from a tropical wave apparently, and the cooling down might have interrupted that process of what we saw not too long ago, but I'm not a meteorologist, so I'm just speculating. But in the meantime, stay safe, folks. Let's take a break. When we come back, I'm going to delve more into the wider topic. I have some questions for a psychologist friend of mine, and hopefully he's not going to have dire warnings to give us. Stay tuned to Talking Point on WSN. We'll be right back.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Let the home store turn your house into a home you love. Get everything you need to give your home that special look and feel. We offer household items, lawn and garden, paint center, hardware, plumbing, lighting and electrical, toys and storage solutions. 5 convenient locations: 6th Avenue Barataria, The Falls at Westmall, Pennywise Plaza Shoguanas, C3 Center Branch and C3 San Fernando. Check out our Facebook page for more information and come visit us today. The Home Store. Turn your house into a home you love.
Alan's Funeral Home, Tunapuna. Relax. We know the loss of a loved one can be challenging, but we've got your back for all your funeral needs, from documents to the service and or burial. Let Alan's Funeral Home take care of you and your loved ones. We are located on the Eastern Main Road in Tunapuna. Call us today at 663-1829 or visit allansfuneralhome.com. Alan's Funeral Home. Let us take care of business.
From Maracas Bay to Arafita Avenue and Piaco, Richard's Bake and Shark brings the world's most popular fish sandwich closer to you. Open daily at all our locations.
You gave us the inspiration to be first. We gave you the solutions that put you first. You walked with us side by side, and we continue to serve you with pride. First Citizen celebrates with you 30 years of achieving dreams, shaping success stories, and painting brighter futures together. And together, we'll accomplish so much more. First Citizens, together, 30 and beyond.
Are you ready?
We're ready. We're ready. Yeah, we're ready.
Fridays just got more important. On Friday, October 13th, Trinidad and Tobago's national football team battles Guatemala in a crucial Nations League encounter from 9 p.m. at the Hazley Crawford Stadium.
Are you ready?
A victory for the Soca Warriors will guarantee us a place in the quarterfinals with a host of possibilities, including the prestigious Copa Football and a World Cup seeding. Calling one and all to the National Stadium on Friday, October 13th. Let us fill it with noise and let the support reverberate. Tickets cost $100 covered, $50 uncovered. Tickets are on sale now at eboxtickets.com and at the venue from 12 p.m. on match day. Show your true colors. Be a fan. Be the ultimate Soca Warrior.
We're ready for the road.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen. And as you may know, I have lamented the fact that after the country responded to the tragic murders that occurred some years ago, we saw marches, we saw movements, we saw concerned citizens speak out with regard to their fears. And then we had a pandemic. It was potentially maybe round 2 or so. We had a pandemic, and the pandemic at some point put a stop to it. Once we got near an Easter vacation and there were fears that we would see surges in COVID. And we've never necessarily seen the public outcry since. And I'm concerned that we are becoming maybe too tolerant, too complacent. We're trying to ignore the problem because it has nothing to do with us, even though nobody likes the fact that we have an ever-growing murder rate, is what it seems. And right now, the question is not if it's going to be high, it's if it's going to break the record that was just set last year. But I'm worried about the lack of response by the population. And to join me, we have the host of WSN Psych and psychologist, Sule Joseph himself here. Because at the end of the day, the first thing, Sule, thanks for coming on. I just want to ask, you know, in a different interview, I remember we had the questions where you mentioned the fact about shelving. We like to shelve a lot. And with regards to crime, do we do similar coping mechanisms that are not necessarily healthy?
Let me answer your question directly by saying yes. So I'll just start with that. Yes, we do. We use a lot of negative coping mechanisms. All right. So we are a party kind of population. We like to lime, drink, and so on, and kind of not stress about what we may determine to be the small things. Don't sweat the small things or the things that we can't really control. So you just, let it go. That is not really treating with the fallout of whatever the issue is. It's more, as you pointed out, shelving. It's more putting it behind you and trying to ignore it, which we do pretty well as a population. Now, there's also something that I talk about regularly when we talk about trauma. And just for persons who've never heard it, when we talk about trauma is too much, too soon for your brain and body to handle, or it's too little over a long period for your brain or body to handle. And one of the things that we're observing from the population is that a lot of the violence that's taking place against children, against adults, just the violence general, we feel as though the population is becoming a bit desensitized to it. So you can experience trauma for such a long period that you become desensitized to the trauma. That it becomes, you now accept that as a normal part of life. This is what it is. And it's very worrying and concerning if we do become a population of people who are in a place of acceptance, that we accept that this is how things are, and that's just how it is. And so that these extreme incidents of traumatic experience, of murders and mistreatment of children and so on, become something that we accept as the norm, and psychologically we accept.
Well, that's
a very scary thought.
To what extent I think in some ways it's there. It's hard to prove, of course, the psychology of the entire population as a whole, but there's signs that this is the case, right? And it's somewhat shocking. But I do have to ask, there's one potential negative consequence of course, if you don't treat with something, the problem will fester and remain. It probably won't get solved. You can't just hope that it solves itself. But then there's also the fact that if you don't treat with something psychologically, it might allow space for that problem to grow. And I guess in the case of like abusive type trauma, or those kinds of acts against somebody else, somebody is traumatizing you with their violence, right? How physical violence, whatever. I always feel as though when you don't respond to it and try to solve it, then over time, it's just natural for human nature. Well, you give them an inch, they take a mile. So the more accepting we might be of it, the more the perpetrators might go further and further and push the boundaries, because it's just natural. Human beings like to kind of go to the limit, see what they could get away with, go further. I got away with this, let me make it, jump it up a notch, 2 more steps and see if I'll get away with it. Do you see that in situations, of course, on a smaller scale, where, you know, not treating with problems could cause it, allow it to grow further?
Well, of course, in the natural order of things, if you think about it, think about a child. Think about a child, or even a pet, a dog. Think about anything that functions on a particular level that you may need to train a certain behavior into, right? For example, let's say for the child, you would like your child to go to bed at a certain time, because maybe they have school in the morning and they can't get up and so on, so they have to go to bed at a certain time. There are some children, if you speak to them sweetly and you tell them, listen, honey, you need to go to bed, and you explain why, they'll go to bed. There are some children, no matter what you do, whether you explain sweetly, whether you speak to them over and over, they're still not going to go to bed. And so sometimes you need to recognize that you have to put stringent systems in place sometimes for some children for their best interest. And they need to recognize that, listen, there's a consequence to a certain behavior. And so I honestly believe, as a population, as a people, and of course this also happens to us as adults, that if we consciously or even unconsciously recognize that there is no consequence to behavior, then we feel as though we are free to continue doing what we please. So if I do a crime and there's no consequence to that crime, if I commit a murder and I feel as though I will not be caught, or I will not have to treat with the consequence of that, then I can see easily how that will train your brain to read, you are above this particular act because there's no consequence for you. I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying there.
Yeah, but that leads me to our next question. Actually, it's making me change tack. So I actually have 2 questions on different wavelengths. But first, I want to, with what you just said there, in a way, you're right. You're training a response. On a certain level, a person might be smart, but a collective in general is not going to be able to act as smartly as an individual. And I'll ask more about that later on, but you know, criminals could be cunning, etc., but generally speaking, it might seem straightforward and oversimplistic, but this behavior, the system, the outcomes are training them, it's rewarding them to push it further and further. Psychologically speaking, once you've gone through that cycle, is it easy to get someone to rehabilitate them, to get them to understand this is not a good thing of what you're doing here? Life rewarded you this way, but this is not how it's supposed to be, and you know, you can't keep doing this. Or could it be that they might be too far gone once they pass a certain point?
Is it possible? Yes. Is it easy? No. So those 2 quick answers to the question. It is very possible. It's very possible. The human mind is very malleable. We have a brain that can adjust, that can grow, right? So with enough and with the right training and environment and so on, anybody can unlearn certain behaviors and so on. That is, let me put a caveat, that is unless the behavior is being influenced by some some abnormality in the brain, and I'm speaking here now to persons who may have parts of your brain, the empathetic part of your brain perhaps either missing or not functioning, or issues with neurological wiring, anything along those lines. Unless that is the cause, we are assuming here we have somebody with a quote-unquote regular or normal functioning brain, then yes, it is possible. It's very possible. But what we have happening, or what I believe we may have happening, as you so quaintly put it, we have a population and a growing population of I don't want to use the word dissidents, but perhaps persons functioning in a criminal type way, and that will influence the individual. When you have persons saying, listen, I don't want to take this money, but I have recognized that there are several other people out there doing worse things with no consequence. It then kind of empowers you or emboldens you to maybe take a step you may have otherwise not maybe considered but never acted upon. And so it makes it more difficult if we don't have these systems in place to ensure consequence for negative behaviors.
Because, I mean, this is just a generality, but we suspect, everybody knows of rumors and suspects, and there's accusations in the political sphere about high-level corruption, and you see the murder rate. So big crimes go on, and is it, it kind of makes sense, right? In your everyday life now, why am I going to not do this small-time thing, right? Even for ordinary citizens. But if ordinary citizens are now being emboldened to break the law, could that be also another indicator? Not even necessarily break the law, but just take advantage of things unethically. It might still be legal, right? Could that be an indicator that, hey, if an ordinary person who normally would not want to break the law, but they're saying, why am I leaving up, being left out? Everybody else stealing, so I should at least take advantage of what I should take advantage of. To some extent now, it kind of props up the whole psychological, I guess you could say, self-feeding system where, well, the big-time criminals seen everybody involved in something. So there's no justice in the system. Why bother being just?
Well, I'll answer that with an example. Have you ever been on the highway during traffic hours and see one person pull onto the shoulder and skip the traffic? What happens after that? After that one person gets away with pulling across on the shoulder, what tends to happen?
Everybody goes until or unless a police officer is there, just randomly to bummy everybody's scene. And then they'll complain, why are you here? You're not supposed to be here. They won't realize you get catch. Give it up.
Correct. And not only would that person who now gets caught, be caught, but they would feel wronged and aggrieved because so many other people have been allowed to do it. Now that I have done it, now is a problem. Now, what's the issue with me? You've internalized it now as the system having an issue or attacking you personally, because it has allowed and permitted so many other people to not experience consequence for a breach. And so, for example, if I am, and I'm not saying this is the only reason, but I'm just going through the psychology of it. If things are hard with me financially and so on, and I'm thinking, how do I make this money? I could rob somebody. And, I see papers. All of these persons are being robbed in a certain area and so on. And the bandits have been getting away. Then it may not necessarily be the thing that prompts me to do it, but it's a factor that will aid in my thinking. I can do this, and it's possible to get away with it, right? So that group community activity of criminal behavior and the lack of consequence that they face will have some impact on other persons now wanting to commit criminal activity and participate in that behavior.
Okay, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
So I said earlier that, it seems as though there's this phenomenon where individuals might be smart on their own, right? You could reason with them, talk to them, have a good conversation. Once you get a group, like a large group, society in general is one big large group. together and you have to treat with them as a whole, it seems as though the intelligence level of the population just drops, right? You can have all the intellectuals you want on their own with master's degrees, but you get a group together and all of a sudden, the ability now for the coordinated consensus is so difficult that regardless of how smart they are individually, it just seems to drop with regards to how intelligent the responses they might have to things are. And I do have to ask, to what extent could something like that make this whole thing a lot more difficult? Because we see it's not just the high levels of murders, but I think either late last year or this year, I started noticing, wait, we marched when a young lady or two was killed, but a 6-year-old just got shot, and we didn't really do anything, right? We just had 3 children killed. We didn't necessarily do anything. And to me, I see this as an escalation, but it's almost as though the population now, either they just don't know how to respond, they can't process it fast enough in the moment, or perhaps they're so distrustful of the system that they don't know what to make of it anymore. And is it going to be now an uphill battle to get them back to a healthier place, to trust the system, to do the right thing, to speak out when necessary, to respond what we might say appropriately?
There's so many things happening that it's difficult to surmise exactly what the cause might be unless there's a definitive study across the populace. But there was a U.S. president, right? There was a U.S. president who kind of, the point I'm about to make, I think perfectly represented by that president's tenure. There was one, not crisis, but there was always some major breaking news issue with this particular U.S. president. Mm-hmm. They were so rapid and they were happening so quickly one after the other, it was difficult to process any one of them at any time. Even the news agencies had a difficulty in tying down one issue to kind of treat with, because by the time you are trying to process the first one, 6 others have occurred. And the last one is probably even bigger than the first one. So do you let go of this first one and process the last one? So there can possibly be this issue of just being overwhelmed by all that is happening in quick succession. That is a possibility, right? So you can just be in shock of the entirety that, because it is just happening so rapidly and you just don't have time to process it and internalize the information. There's that. There can also be the possibility, as we mentioned previously, of this disengagement where persons kind of have now become so accustomed to the trauma of these type of incidences occurring that the initial feeling of outrage and outcry, while persons still may be disappointed in what is happening, you may not have this, this swelling up of emotion to come out and march because we've done it, we've tried it, and things have still been escalating and going on. What do we do? Kind of thing. You're in that emotional space. There's that. There are also many other factors, I think, as well, because with some of the girls' deaths, I think certain communities were hit really hard with those incidents, and I feel as though some of those communities may not traditionally be accustomed to those things occurring, and so they stood up and got up, and that's where it and started the marches and started speaking out on certain things, and we may have in some of these incidences now communities that may be more accustomed, if I could use that word, maybe more accustomed to seeing this type of violence perpetrated and so on, and so have become a bit more acclimatized and desensitized to the violence in their own in the community, which is very unfortunate, but it's something that we should also consider.
Because, the last incident with our babies being discarded in the trash, I just feel as though, as a society, we're becoming more and more callous. Now, the thing is, in the case of an individual abuse victim, so this is the setup, right? We know that it might be difficult to get an abuse victim to seek treatment. They might not want to come forward. They might want to give excuses. Say it's a domestic violence situation, right? One partner doesn't necessarily want to speak out against the other partner. It could be a cultural thing, whatever have you. But usually in that situation, there are a lot of third parties that potentially could be involved to provide support, right? And there's a lot of various authority figures, police people, counselors, etc., that could potentially provide support. In the case of a society with a problem with crime, where the amount of crime might be abusive, right? To some extent, a population votes in the authority. The authority in this case would be the government, the elected officials. So if the population isn't willing to do anything, the politicians themselves might also be unwilling to do something. So I say this to say, I'm concerned that we as a society, for all intents and purposes, there's nobody to come and save us. There's no counselor for the society or authority figure for the society. Because the society is supposed to be the bosses of the elected representatives. So however we do it, it will involve some degree of us being the collective victim, having to pull ourselves out of it. How difficult is that usually, if you take it on the smaller scale? The example of an individual abuse victim.
If you're talking about an entire community, an entire country basically trying to, if I understand the question correctly, trying to hold its leadership, its government accountable while still trying to pull itself out of...
Well, that's all part of pulling itself out of the problem, depending. It's not that the government is directly involved, but they're part of the system. So however it has to be, I don't want to go into specifics on that. Just in general, it will involve the population of doing things for themselves on some level, somewhere, somehow.
Well, it's essentially, and I love this quote, it's like, it's the idea of trying to lift yourself by the handle of a bucket while you stand in it. That's almost impossible task that you're asking, because you want the population to recognize that for itself and an entire population. When you're talking about a group and as group think, you have different types of groups functioning and coming together as a consensus to recognize that we are under attack psychologically as a population, and address that. Come up with workable solutions to address that. We have much easier things that we can come together and agree as a population on, and we can't do that. It will be exceedingly difficult for us to, one, recognize it as a population, because that takes self-assessment. Recognize as a population that we have been traumatized, or we continue to be traumatized as a population, and that we as a population need to seek help. Because a big part of that would be one of the reasons that, I'll take this back. Over last weekend, I think Sunday, I would have attended, I was asked to be a speaker at a graduation ceremony for a football club in East Port-of-Spain, right? And so they're trying to, I think Angus Eve was there, he gave away some footballs and so on, and they talked about exchanging balls, guns for footballs and so on. So it was very positive and so on. And they invited media houses and so on. And I believe only one media house showed up to the graduation. But what we find a lot of is media houses racing to put on the front page and spread it all of the violence and gruesome crimes. And as a population, while we seem maybe disgruntled by the news, we are not disgusted by the fact that we paste that on a front page daily. Yeah, stuff like that. Seeing those gruesome images and having that news being the first thing that you catch on your eye, and have that still sell papers, or the papers recognizing that that is what sells and pushing that, speaks to us as a population. It says that we rather hear about these gruesome crimes, we rather see this violence and gruesomeness than see a community of children who are struggling do well and graduate from a program and have possibilities of doing better. So it speaks to us as a population. So while we want to point fingers at our leadership and so on and those sorts of things, we also need to take a good look at ourselves as a population. Why are we so intrigued by the gruesomeness of murder of children and violence and crime and criminology, and we complain and so on, but we want to see that on the front page? Those are the things that we purchase. Yeah, because we have spending power, and if we decide and recognize that as something that we don't want necessarily to be not out of the conversation, but not to the forefront, then, you know, we kind of spin up in mud, because we complain about the problem and we see the issue, but we're not self-assessing to recognize that we have digested the issue and we're a part of it.
I mean,
we're traumatized.
We're traumatized. You could say a similar thing with regards to politics and political coverage, and in a way, it begs the question, is it that our preferences are driving to some extent the trauma? Because at the very least, the information that is traumatizing, you're quite right. We demand it from the news media. We want the negative stories. We want the big, you know, what's going on? How bad could it get? I want to stay informed about that. We don't necessarily get informed about the positive side. So are we driving our own abuse to some extent? Obviously, we are not telling the criminals commit crime, but we want to see it.
So what happens a lot of times is that you have persons who are stuck in a trauma loop, right? Think about the person who always, or the person who always says that they always find these terrible partners for the women that, you know, all the men that they have around them, or the men that they end up with are dogs or abusive and so on. Or the woman that you tend to find are not, you know, the women are abusive verbally or whatever. You're stuck in a trauma loop. What has happened is that you for yourself have been traumatized. There's a reason you keep going after a similar type of person. There are characteristics that you are attracted to, or you attract, or so on, or whatever, and that is because of whatever trauma experience that you would have endured. So as a population, yes, we are stuck in this trauma loop. There are issues that we need to address as a people as to what keeps us going back for the news of these gruesome and horrific things. What is it? And we need to address and assess that and work on it. Because yes, we demand
it. The other question I want to say, because to some extent, it's not always fair to blame politicians. They're from society. Criminals are from society. Police are from
Correct.
society.
Correct.
Is it just that we need to be willing and able, and both of those things are not necessarily mutually inclusive, or not the same thing, rather? Is it that we have to be willing and able to find or recognize good leadership, accept good leadership, and follow good leadership? You know, because collectively, we are somewhat responsible for where we've reached, how we engage in politics, how we speak about crime, how much we ourselves just tolerate but are still fascinated by the gruesome headlines.
Well, I am no political analyst, so I can't you know, I can't profess to speak specifically on that. But what I can say is this: earlier we spoke about consequence, and consequence affecting your psychological state and so on. One of the things I think when we talk about consequence is also accountability, because accountability brings consequence, or ought to bring consequence. Mm-hmm. And so if we have a population that is, I won't say devoid, but oftentimes don't have accountability to lead to consequence, I feel like that's a huge area for what causes the psychology and the thinking of the Trinidadian or the Trinbagonian, right? Because the politicians should also have some level of accountability as well. You should have to account. And if there's no accountability, there should be consequence. But if there's no consequence and there's no accountability, then what we find, of course, given human nature, is that you tend to end up doing what you want. Mm. Despite whatever your good intentions may initially be, you kind of just end up doing what you want. The criminal the criminal or the person who robs or whatever may initially start doing it for the noblest of reasons. Maybe things are really hard at home. They have children that must be fed, or sick parents, or sick relative, and perhaps that is a noble reason for them as to why they must do it. But I think the more that you get yourself involved in these activities, the more that you get in it and you recognize that there's no accountability or consequence, is the more that you feel freer and more liberated to kind of just let go and just follow a part of you that we call the id. And your id is your part of your conscious where that exists on impulse. It just meets whatever impulsive behaviors that you want.
Well, Sule, I unfortunately cannot continue with my impulse of wanting to continue this conversation because we have to break for news. But I think that's a good place to end it there. The lack of accountability is further fueling some of the problems that we have. And like you said, it's difficult to know the full extent of everything without studies, and that takes time and a lot of effort. But we're seeing some of the consequences for a lack of effort now. So thanks for the discussion. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having me. Have a beautiful day in Tobago.
That is the host of WSN Psych, psychologist Sule Joseph. Sean Michael Small here talking about. We'll be back for the last call-in segment of the week. News on the hour is next. Stay tuned.
The WESN News on the Hour. I'm Sira Ali. Thanks for joining us. Here are the headlines. Investigation underway following a tragic fire that claimed the life of 13-month-old toddler. Ministry of Health issues recall for TheraBreath Kids Strawberry Mouthwash. Internationally, Colombian army has apologized for killing thousands of civilians. Now for the details. In the wake of a devastating fire that tragically claimed the life of a 13-month-old baby girl on Wednesday, investigations into the incident are ongoing. The Trinidad and Tobago Fire Service expressed its deepest condolences to the grieving family and the loved ones of the young victim in a heartfelt statement. According to an official release, the incident was reported around 11:15 a.m. via the emergency number 990. Responding promptly, firefighting units from the Chigones Fire Station arrived at the scene. Upon arrival, firefighting operations swiftly commenced, confining the blaze to a bedroom on the first floor of the residence. Tragically, the fire resulted in injuries to 3 individuals and the lifeless body of little Harley Passad, aged just 13 months old, was discovered amidst the aftermath. The Ministry of Health has issued an important announcement regarding a voluntary recall for a specific lot of TheraBreath Kids Strawberry Splash 16-ounce mouthwash. This particular lot of the product was exclusively available for purchase on Amazon between May 31st and September 2nd. The recall has been initiated by Church and Dwight Company Incorporated, the manufacturer of the product, due to concerns of microbial contamination. Specifically, the presence of yeast, identified as Candida parasilosis, has been detected in this particular lot. TheraBreath Strawberry Splash for Kids is primarily marketed as an anti-cavity mouthwash suitable for both adults and children aged 6 years and older. Internationally, the Colombian army has apologized for killing thousands of civilians and falsely passing them off as left-wing guerrillas to boost its kill rate during the country's armed conflict. An inquiry found that 6,402 civilians were murdered by the military between 2002 and 2008 and passed off as rebels in a practice dubbed false positives. In an event attended by mothers of some of the victims, the defense minister called the killings shameful. They were not rebels, he added. The commander of the Colombian army, Luis Ospina, said that painful acts were committed by members of the national army that should have never happened. Victims were young men, mainly from poor neighborhoods in and around the capital, Bogota. Well, that's news to the hour on WESN. I'm Sierra Ali. Thanks for watching.
We exposed 5 strangers to KFC's delicious chicken to see if any time could be KFC time. And at the first bite, the party began. We repeated the experiment during the day, during business hours, on weekends, with sunshine, with rain. And it's confirmed. KFC's flavor makes anytime KFC time. KFC, it's finger licking good.
Are you ready?
We're ready. We're ready. Yeah, we're ready.
Fridays just got more important. On Friday, October 13th, Trinidad and Tobago's national football team battles Guatemala in a crucial Nations League encounter from 9 p.m. at the Hazley Crawford Stadium. A victory for the Soca Warriors will guarantee us a place in the quarterfinals with a host of possibilities, including the prestigious Copa Football and a World Cup seeding. Calling one and all to the National Stadium on Friday, October 13th. Let us fill it with noise and let the support reverberate. Tickets cost $100 covered, $50 uncovered. Tickets are on sale now at eboxtickets.com and at the venue from 12 p.m. on match day. Show your true colors. Be a fan. Be the ultimate Soca Warrior.
We're ready for the road.
Welcome back to Talking About, ladies and gentlemen. I just spoke with my colleague, Sule Joseph, psychologist and host of WSN Psych, about a concern I have, and I've been speaking about it ever so often over the last year, maybe longer, I can't remember at this point, because some of what he said actually mirrors, and I didn't necessarily have this conversation off air with him, so it was his own original thoughts on the matter. It mirrors what Karen has said with regards to the cycle of negative stories in the press. We're drowning in it. Now, of course, Karen is speaking primarily about the political dimension with regards to society. Sule is more looking at the criminal and traumatic aspects of the violence in our society. And it was kind of interesting that, you know, he saw some of the same observable patterns in just how our news cycle happens. And when he said that we're caught in a cycle of abuse, I think some people might think it's a rhetorical thing for him to say we're stuck in a trauma loop, and on a practical level, what does that mean? Well, it's somewhat true. The more the situation devolves and the violence increases, the more we kind of push other things to the side, and now we want to hear about the violence. And the unfortunate thing is we don't have positive stories that directly push back against the violence. Youth initiatives to prevent crime in the future from our young people now, they're not as popular as if a murderer was caught. The catch is the murderer has to have murdered someone for his capture to then take place. That's the relevance of that story is predicated on the fact that someone or multiple people already lost their lives. And to some level, that's what we want to see. And the positive things don't get highlighted. We don't hear about it. It doesn't push the positive message out throughout our communities. On a real level, he's right. Now, I spoke about other things today as well. You don't have to speak about what Sue and I spoke about. Crime is one of those topics where people get very upset quick, and I feel as though we'll get calls about it, and then at some point, to some extent like myself, you don't necessarily want to think about it all the time, so you don't call in about it all the time. You could call on other things, but I would welcome commentary on what Sule has said. If you agree, disagree, I agree with him. We have our first caller on the line. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
I have some quick points. Let me first say, I didn't want to early in the week to because there's some important topics I think that warranted discussion. But I didn't want the week to pass for me to not pick a bone with you on an issue.
Mm-hmm.
On when ASPRD was on the show.
Right.
I called and I asked ASPRD a particular question. And ASPRD was not allowed by you to answer the question, and you answered the question. It was a question about police officers knowing in their ranks who are the corrupt officers or are suspected. And I want to say, I was really disappointed that you did not allow ASPRD to answer the question or allowed him to shielded him from the question. And I will hope next week I'm going to ask him again that same question, and I hope I get a response from him, because as a member of the TTPS and as a media ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes these hard questions need to be asked to those people.
Yes.
And see what response they come up with. That's one. Secondly, I appreciated Sule on your program talking about these issues. However, Rennie Cummins has been speaking about this for 20 years. 20 years ago, Rennie Cummins, all what Sule said there, I listened to Rennie Cummins say that. What we want is enough talk. We want solutions, Sean. That is why I so appreciate Dabidi when he talks about solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever it is, we come up with solutions. Let's hear people like Sule not talk about what the issue is and what causes. We also want to hear about solutions. We also want to hear about solutions to these issues. And one other thing, the TTPS, I keep saying this, you cannot fight what we're experiencing with crime in the society. The TTPS has changed their approach and come with a lot of good initiatives, social initiatives and that type of thing. But you cannot fight force with kindness alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I keep saying this, the TTPS needs to take the gloves off and take the fight to the criminals. And the society has to accept that. If it is that they want criminal activity to diminish in the society, because what you're seeing is the criminals are getting more and more and more emboldened. You this morning spoke about an issue with a contractor and a recording.
Yeah.
That is how emboldened they are getting, and it's going to get worse unless the authorities stand up and say, "Yo, the buck stops here. It ain't going further than this."
Mm-hmm.
Time to push back.
All right, we have another caller waiting.
Okay, you let somebody come, and that is where my situation is.
Yeah.
We need solutions, Sean. Have a good weekend.
I just want to respond. Generally, I didn't intend to cut the ASP off on that. Generally, what happens is he will respond, and I will kind of give a response because there are things that I'm willing to say that he cannot say. But I think part of what happened, it's not that I didn't want him to speak to that. The problem is we just didn't have time. So I'm actually taking time. I'm having a caller wait. When we respond to calls, we have to make callers wait. And sometimes we don't make callers wait, and then we end up with not enough time to respond to everything, or we just forget about certain points. So that was an oversight. Feel free to ask any question. That would be for the best, so that you ensure that you get a response on it. And yes, I think in general I agree with you. I don't know how far the gloves coming off, like the details, that might be debatable, but I agree with you. They need firm consequences. As Suli said, they need consequences. So with regards to solutions, we were pointing at the directions of solutions, but we'll continue that conversation. Don't worry about that. There's follow-up, so that we just have to figure out where. Okay, caller from Digger Martin. Sorry for keeping you waiting. You're on the air if you're still with us. Good morning.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Two quick points.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get a chance to interface with Karen on Wednesday, your co-host.
Right.
I thought she did a tremendous job, and she gave the ministers a lecture on Integrity 101 because they were not honest to me as a observer, and I think she did a tremendous job. The fact that the Minister of Local Government could tell us the crime rate, you know where I'm going, decrease because it increased.
Yeah, the major crime rate, yeah.
So abject for a minister not to understand that it had nothing to do with crime fighting. It's COVID, everybody was locked down. If people understand, when it floods, you don't get no murders in the night, you know. The other thing I want to talk about, I think the newspaper and the print media in general basically condoning a lot of the things and filtering at the narrative with respect to crime. And why I'm saying that, they have a particular objective to serve, and they do it. And I will give you my experiment. There's a crime show on another TV station, and I know they censor the call, because when you ask the police hard question, they don't respond, and they defer to another time. And when you call back to get an answer, they don't answer you, because I know the city number. I have overcome that by using another phone line to get them engaged. And the final one, you see that contractor with extortion?
Yeah.
I would like people to investigate. Is that a genuine contractor, or is it one of the contractors that Gary was alluding to? Because I am seeing it from a different angle, and I hope the newspaper explore it. Is it rivalry between gangs and gangs in getting contract? That is a scary, scary thing, because the way I watch the narrative and the storytelling, one of the things they didn't tell you to give you any voice of the contractor himself. By getting a voice recording of the contractor, it will tell you the competency and the level of the contractor. I say no more, Sean. And give my regards to Karen. I will interface with her when I get another time. Bye. Have a nice day.
Have a nice day. Your last point, at the end of the day, I think it speaks to the fact that, look, the lack of trust in the system, now, when we have a story that purports someone to be the victim, we have to question, if we could cut the line there, guys. Yeah, we have to question the victim, right? Especially when we have situations where it doesn't seem normal. But even in this, and I think part of it comes from the fact that the gangs might have engaged in this sort of activity with other less than reputable contractors, but then at some point, because of the lack of consequence, as Sule pointed out, at some point, instead of engaging crooked contractors, they'll start to try the same tricks with ordinary contractors. So they're not all potentially going to be crooked. I don't know if we've reached that point. Okay, we have 2 calls on the line, so I can't respond to everything. The first call is from, okay, we have a call from Tobago. Good morning, caller.
Hey, good morning, Sean. How are you this morning?
Morning. I am better than yesterday, let's put it that way.
All right, very well. That's good. Better is always good. In response to I heard a caller speak about taking off the gloves. The police must take off the gloves. Yes, they must. But the community must also take off its gloves. The decent people in these communities, Sean, outnumber the criminal-minded people. And as long as the decent people remain barricaded behind bars on their doors, bars on their windows, they don't come outside and sit on their stoop the way they used to watch the children play on the streets and so forth like they used to. The criminals are running the streets. It used to be that the criminals would only come out at night like roaches, and in the community you could spot them. You could tell who was the bad man. And you tell your children, stay away from that one, and everybody would watch that person, with both eyes. You don't sleep with your eyes closed on that person. Now, the community itself has been co-opted by that those criminal-minded people. And if the police simply increase their numbers and increase their force, what you will have shown is simply a military-type state or police state, as you call it.
Yeah.
And the only people that would be safe in those communities from the criminals would be the very rich people, who is what the police will protect. The police will protect the property, the government property, and they'll protect the very rich people, right? The average person on the street will just be like sheep. They'll have to be running around scared and so forth in their community. They will not be protected from those criminals. So what the community has to do is the people themselves have to get involved and bleed out from their community those people who are literally dragging the community down and dragging the community to hell. It has to be a community involvement. That's my contribution, Sean.
Thank you for that caller. Okay, we don't have a next call, so I could respond to that. Yes, I agree with that 100%. In fact, one of our colleagues, more or less, he voiced concerns that certain communities not going to get the attention, not going to get the outrage, because as Sule said, certain places, either the community might be accustomed to it, so they're not going to be as traumatized, they're not going to speak out as much, or we might say, well, what do you expect from XYZ location? And just write it off. Write it off as, well, that's a bad area, that's a gang area, so there's going to be crime there. Let's not worry about the people that live there. But what the caller said was correct. Decent people outnumber the criminal element in society. That just, I would hope it's truth. I think it's true. The crime statistics then suggest that there's a lot of repeat offenders, if that is true, which we believe it is. We have a call on the line from Dabidi. Good morning, caller.
Hi, good morning. Nice points from the gentleman who spoke earlier. And I think that San Fernando, as usual, always bringing excellent points to your program. Sean, I want to ask you personally this morning, why it is aren't we taking that level of action as citizens of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to the points that we're bringing towards the Commissioner of Police? One consultation symposium on crime is what is needed in this country. And as San Fernando said, you must take it to the criminals and them. If you don't take it to them, they will take it to us, as they're doing right now. They have the upper hand on us. I live in Dabidi. And if I drive from Dabidi to Valencia, I can tell you where each and every drug block is. You think the police doesn't know that? The police and them just put your foot in. If you look at San Fernando and back there, a lot of these drug dealers know exactly where to go. You go in Claxton Bay, you go in Coover, you go in Diego Martin, down, anyhow, we know where we're talking about. Up those hills and straight down inside Diego Martin. You look at Sealux and you look at the Beatum. You look at behind the bridge, up Laventry Road. The police and them know exactly where these drug dealers and where the blocks are. Why aren't they doing anything about it? And they are very much proactive and not reactive. They wait until they hear one drug dealer shoot the other one, and next thing you know, they fly. We as people, we as citizens, and you have all the callers that call in the morning. China, if you could ask Louis to use his power to create a little symposium on crime now. God, it's not that difficult. Have a nice weekend, bro.
Thank you, caller. Thank you for that. Okay, we have a caller from Chaguanas. I'll try not to forget what you said because there's some things I want to follow up with what you said. But good morning, Professor.
Yeah, I take exception with your contributor who said nobody gives solution. That is what I give all the time. You enforce all your laws. You review your position with your annual administrative report, which must include recommendations and the rationale. And I am happy to see in this last set of senators, Suniti Maharaj, because as a journalist, she always did that. So I hope she continue in the Senate. Any questions?
No, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think, and it might be a semantics thing. Whereas some of the other callers, they're looking for certain types of answers, perhaps might be the best way to put it. Because to some extent, you know, we speak about, very much on talking point, we will speak about the question in a broad sense, right? And then we might provide not necessarily the answers, but the beginning of an answer or the point to the direction of the answer. You know, this is what we need to be thinking about, how we need to be thinking about the problem. But to say that you get a practical, detailed answer and working solution, obviously there are going to be limits. And I think that's where it is. You know, you could give you could give solutions, but there will be limits how practical and detailed they would be. That might be the disconnect, and I think it's the same thing for me. Because people are interested now in actually seeing things done. Of course, the flip side is we're a talk show. We can't actually get things done. I don't think the politicians will take my advice because, and one of the big reasons why, and it goes back to what the caller previously said before, the professor from Dabadi. Remember the famous quote, politics has a morality all its own. And at the end of the day, without consequences, politicians will, for the most part, they don't want to rock the boat. That's why, as much as when I believed it was the right thing to close down Petrotrin, and maybe that might have still been the right thing, but keep the refinery running, right? So the refinery and Petrotrin is not exactly the same thing. So when I had that opinion, and I still to some extent have that opinion with regards to the company itself, I didn't necessarily give the government props for it. Because I didn't think any government would have wanted to do that, would have wanted to make an enemy of a big union like the OWTU, would have wanted to do something that could be perceived as unpopular. I just felt that they thought it was to some extent necessary. And there's no props for that, you know? Why am I going to give it? What is the courage of doing something that you're forced to do because of circumstances, potentially? There's nothing courageous there. There's nothing innovative there or inspiring there. You would just, thank goodness, if you thought you had to do it, you at least weren't such a chicken that you try to avoid the problem and let it run into the ground. Because some politicians do that. They just avoid the problem. They're so chicken, they don't even want to deal with it. But the real issue is not that. We get some of that here with regards to crime. They don't want to deal with it. They don't know how. They don't want to try. They don't want to risk it. They don't want to risk their career. But then the other thing is, the main thing is, they don't want to upset the apple cart. And right now, to us, the murder rate's out of control. What's going on? Children getting killed, babies getting dumped, old women getting raped. What's going on? Things out of control. And more as time goes on, the language of the opposition leader becomes less and less ludicrous. It's still over the top, but it becomes less and less ludicrous. And that's a bad sign, because that should never be something that is practical reality in a society. But they don't suffer any consequences for it. Think about it. That's the whole point about the lack of public outcry, the lack of marches. That's why I look towards the elections, because what are the consequences that the politicians will suffer for it? And it's not just about the PNM. Because all the other politicians are also looking at the situation. And depending on how we communicate our disapproval, or if we don't, even if you vote in another party, that doesn't necessarily mean that they will actually enact change. Because if the status quo is stable enough for me to remain in power, why am I going to risk things and upset the apple cart and in order to put stringent anti-crime measures in order to bolster the police service, right? And that doesn't even begin to ask the question or to consider the fact that political corruption is not zero. We don't know how widespread it is, but let's be real. It's not reasonable to assume it's zero. So who has a stake in not wanting their little operation being uncovered by a better, more robust police service? So until politicians have a consequence, we can't expect them to change their behavior. Until criminals have a consequence, we can't expect them to change their behavior. Society, the question is, how long are we willing to ignore the consequences of our behavior. Because remember, the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago is not Australian. He's a Trinbagonian. We selected him. We tell him what we want. He gives us what we want. To some extent, you can't blame him for that when he's doing what he believes we're telling him to do. Because in this situation, it's not as though there's marches all over the Red House and all over town and traffic being blocked up and protests and people being voted out of office, and he's not getting the correct signals. What he's getting is a population being complacent. There's a lot more I would like to say, but I can't. We're more or less out of time. So I'd like to thank all of the callers for calling in. With regards to solutions, this is not necessarily a platform to enact solutions, so it's tricky, but I understand. And as we continue on with the discussions, hopefully we will get there to things, definite things that we will ask to see, call on the politicians to see, call on the other citizens to see. But I think one of the things that I said today is a solution, and it might seem basic and it might seem risky. At a time when there are police officers just out there to collect a check, they don't want to risk their own necks. Why should we do it? To be fair, the professor might say, well, why we got to do their job for them? And I very much understand that statement. But if we're not going to get enough help from other sectors, as somebody called said, we need to rise up, not with violence, but we need to stand up for ourselves the right way. And that means doing our part, ensuring that the police gets as much evidence that we could provide to prosecute crimes. If we do our part, then the blame falls squarely on them. But if we want to hide ourselves and want to leave the problems for other people to deal with on their own, when they fail, don't expect the blame to be fairly just on their shoulders. We are part of the society. We have to be responsible for ourselves as well. It's a tough pill to swallow. It's not easy. And in some cases, it might be dangerous. But do you want to run scared, not be a snitch, and still end up being a victim anyway? Isn't that a shame? We want to have a good day. We need to make it ourselves. We need to support our government. Whether we like them or not, they are our government. We need to do our part and make today and this weekend a good day and a great weekend. As my coach always says, we will see you next week, Monday. Goodbye.
WESN.
I'm Keaton Shaw, and we are WESN, the content capital.
Are you ready?
We're ready. We're ready. Yeah, we're ready.
Fridays just got more important. On Friday, October 13th, Trinidad and Tobago's national football team battles Guatemala in a crucial Nations League encounter from 9 p.m. at the Hazley Crawford Stadium. A victory for the Soca Warriors will guarantee us a place in the quarterfinals with a host of possibilities, including the prestigious Copa Football and a World Cup seeding. Calling one and all to the National Stadium on Friday, October 13th. Let us fill it with noise and let the support reverberate. Tickets cost $100 covered, $50 uncovered. Tickets are on sale now at eboxtickets.com and at the venue from 12 p.m. on match day. Show your true colors. Be a fan. Be the ultimate Soca Warrior.
We're ready for the road.
Join me, Dr. Nalini Kokram, on What's Up Doc, where we discuss all your burning questions concerning health.
Trinidad and Tobago is among one of the highest risk group of patients that develop this form of genetic breast cancer.
What I'd like to take home from a short interview like this, screening. You must screen.
Because it's silent.
It's silent.
Yeah.
And because it's silent, you don't know it's there.
What's Up Doc, every Tuesday and Thursday on WESN, Content Capital.
Is it politics? What is it? Is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing now, Andy.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is there no pressure on Nicholas Ball?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the red, white and black.
Why are we saying